Thanks for listening to Fluff and Crunch, where we talk about the connection and sometimes disconnect between system, setting, and story in tabletop RPGs. We're recording now. There we go. Oh, you know what's strange is I start recording and it gives me this countdown at 55 minutes, but then it kicks us off at 40 minutes. Whatever.
Okay, obviously.
I looked a little bit at the Discord thing, recording there, and I'm going to keep looking elsewhere and seeing what other options we have, rather. But that said, good morning, good evening. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm all right. How are you?
I'm pretty well. I went running before breakfast so that it wasn't scorchingly hot, and then I can hide inside for the rest of the day.
Ooh, it's coming to get you.
Oh, you got to have the creepy kid with the hair over her face. So I know you probably haven't done any gaming in the last 3 days.
Nope.
I certainly haven't. And we haven't had time. In our next episode, we're going to do a review of the Star Trek Adventure 2nd edition that Modifius was kind enough to provide us PDF copies of, but we haven't had time enough to review that in full. So that's not today. But what we are going to talk about is my game.
Yes.
We've been going back and forth on system and all this stuff, and we'll come back to yours at some point, and then we'll come back to the topic of it. Maybe not it, but the topic. I think there's more to this than you think.
No, genuinely, by the time that I will be able to play it, I won't have the time to write it. Gotcha. I had the time to write it, which is now. I've got one more week of sort of having lots of time to write stuff, and no, I've decided that for various reasons, which I don't want to go into.
Yeah, we won't.
It's not good air time. I should just leave it, bin it completely, and at least I know if I start again, I've got a better idea how to start and what to do at the start.
Yeah,
however,
we'll come back to that. But let's go back. Let's go back to mine. And if you're catching us midstream here, if you're we're down the road a bit on this, what we've been working on for about the last month and some longer than that, actually, in terms of ideas, is our own games. And I've made a significant amount of progress system-wise connected to the story. You're right. I actually have less of a game than I have a genre. That I am doing a horror game that is set in various periods in American history. So all the way from the colonial era to the present, the system, I'm building the system and building the game so that you can play in any of those eras. And
so barely any history or time span at all we're talking about that.
Yeah, it's going to be great.
Yes.
And
I am smug.
That's okay. So yeah, what I've done though is I've actually been able to play test it a few times. Been able to play test the thing a few times. Doing that again this weekend and next weekend because of like group availability that we're not going to be playing Kingmaker with Castles and Crusades. So here's what I wanted to throw out there. I wanted to throw out some of the revisions that I've done to the core mechanic, and then talk about the fear system because I think that's absolutely essential in a horror game. Like, I think there's a difference between like, hey, it's an action investigative game and we're fighting like supernatural monsters. Well, you can do that in D&D. Anytime a zombie or a vampire or something, that's what you're doing. But there's a difference between doing that and having a horror game where fear and the bad things that are all attached to that are part of the game. So really quickly, overview of the core system that I nailed down outside of like any kind of revisions that are forced on me by, playtesting. D12 dice pool based system. Stat plus skill. Stats go from 1 to 5, 2 being average. Skills go from 1 to 4, 2 being proficient. All right, so you add those two numbers together. That's how many D12s you roll. All you pay attention to are ones or double-digit numbers. So 10 through 12 is a success.
Yeah.
1 is a potentially complicating factor. And a 12 is a success that you roll again to potentially roll another success. Now, if you roll a 1, if you roll a 12, that counts as a success. If you roll a 1 on the re-roll of that, that 1 does not count.
Okay.
Okay. The only time 1s matter is if you fail and you roll 1s, then you botch. That's when really bad things happen. Or you succeed and you roll more 1s than successes. Because a default minimal success is 1 success.
Yeah.
So kind of like year 0 dice pool system with the D6s, as long as you roll 1 success, you are successful, albeit minimally. So it is
but
possible.
You're already being more generous on, like, Mutant Year Zero, you were often rolling sort of 4 dice needing 6s. So you're
Yeah, and the
rolling
numbers are so
roughly the
against.
same, but yours are slightly better because you're you've basically, you're a 5.5 and a 6. So, and
Yeah,
12 being able to explode. So
yeah.
that's
So
already giving you a little bit, but not an insane amount
no,
of
no, no, no. And
success, but
I worked out the
slightly better than
numbers.
Year Zero.
I worked out the probability, and I'm happy with it. So
Yeah,
a
that sounds
character
good.
with an average stat who is proficient in their skill will be successful about 2/3 of the time. And rolling is only supposed to take place when the situation matters or when it's stressful. So there's the core system. I do
Yeah.
have a meta currency. If you roll additional successes, you can spend those to increase the damage or information learned, things like that. Now, on the investigative side, we tried this out and it worked. That is entirely skills based in that your attributes in this way don't play a role. Your skill rating gives you per adventure, per story, not per scene.
Ooh.
Yeah. And there's a reason for that. Let's say you have, it gives you that many questions that you automatically get answered. You have to ask a question. It could be a yes, no, or a fact seeking question. And there's guidance in the GM chapter. So the idea is, for example, if you have like knowledge of zoology and you're off like tracking some beastie in the woods and you see footprints, you could say, hey, what kind of animals might have made these footprints? Are these footprints from a quadruped or a bipedal animal? Okay, that's a yes, no, or a like a fact-seeking question. Let's say you had a 3 in zoology, you would have 3 such questions that you could ask of the GM. No roll necessary. Once you expend those 3 points, you've got to go to rolling. You could roll and ask the questions later. It's just the point is the investigatory system provides you with a budget of foundation laying fact questions so that you don't ever find yourself in a situation where you're rolling for information that you need to move the plot forward and you fail. The reason why I decided per story instead of per scene is because you can always roll for investigations, but I want players to not treat their characters like one-trick ponies, because any skill can be used for an investigation. You could have firearms and you could have like, reason plus firearms and be trying to figure out like what caliber, what size weapon, where was this fired from, So any skill, it's not just the traditional investigation type skills. Any skill, if the player can make a good enough Shaggy Dog story to the GM as to why knowledge of whatever would be relevant to enable you to gather information, learn things, yeah, you can use that. So there's a core system. Obviously, there's more detail to it, but I'm not going to go over that here. I want to focus on the fear system. Before I get to that, do you have any questions, comments, or anything about that? Because it's worked. We've run it.
Yeah, just one. You said like, oh, you got a stat of, no, sorry, you get a skill of 3, you get 3 questions. Is that 3 questions per skill, or is it like you take your best investigative skill?
No. So, for example, let's say you have 2 points in history, whatever. 2 points, or how about 2 points in occult? That'd be really useful. You have 2 points in occult, and then you have a point in zoology. Okay, so that would give you 2 questions about occult issues.
Okay.
And 1 question about zoology. So all of your skills, depending on the context and how you decide to use them, all of them could be fair game for ways to gather information.
Yeah, that sounds perfectly sensible. And we've done episodes on investigation beforehand, so that sounds like a good way of not having to rely on the rolls, but you can do, but also not just giving everyone
Yes,
everything. So I think that's a very, and also the better your investigative skills are, the more stuff you'll be able to find out.
correct.
So that sounds like a very clever way of getting an answer.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
sounding
So
good.
that's what I was thinking. So, okay, the fear system, which I'm calling the stability. You do a stability test. And on the character sheet, there is a 7-point track, and there's room to put a glass bead or something like that. That's what I'm envisioning because it's fluid. So
Yeah.
you start off a game in the middle. You are stable. You're neither afraid, you're neither fired up or anything like that. What happens is when you are exposed to something that could cause fear, like an emotionally challenging situation, like a zombie devouring your neighbor's brain, like that thing right behind you. Okay, and I'll get to a little bit on the monster side of things, like what does that mean? How does that add up? But when you're exposed to something that could cause fear, you roll a stability test, and what you're going to roll is your current toughness, and toughness is basically like your hit points. It is a combination of your willpower and your stamina. Because think about this for a minute. Your toughness, your ability to withstand damage, setbacks, things like that, is both physical and emotional.
Okay.
So, current toughness is really important. So you roll a test, current toughness, and you're there at stable. If you fail the test, you move one space to. There are 3 spaces on either side, so it's a 7-point track, and dead center is just stable. Fear is on the left, and courage is on the right. So if you fail, you scoot one space to the left. The GM can spend meta currency to push you farther, okay? But that's costly. Each step in the track to the left, you go nervous, scared, terrified. And each of those 3 steps has a cumulative mechanical effect. If you succeed, let's say you're stable and you see that thing right behind you, okay? You succeed on that test. If you have some meta currency, if you have some surplus success to spend, you can spend a point to move one to the right. And that's where you become focused. And there is a mechanical benefit associated with being focused. And my thought is sometimes when you are faced with bad things, they overwhelm you or you bite your thumb at them. You
Yeah.
know, like Dr. Peter Venkman coming out of the ballroom and saying, "We came, we saw, we kicked its
Ass.
ass." There you go. You get fired up by it. So if you succeed on a stability test, you can move from stable one to the right to focused. The next time, whether you're stuck on one side or the other, the next time you are faced with something, the GM forces a stability test on you, you have an opportunity to either stay put, move to the left if you fail, or if you succeed and spend points, you can move farther to the right. So it's a continuum. And as you move around, you either gain or shed penalties or benefits. And again, they're cumulative. Now, when you move to the outer edges, when you move to either terrified or you have you have a panic response or you have the hero's response. That's where you get really fired up. When you move to that outside, that's when more, call them extreme or noticeable things happen. But that you don't stay put. Like if you're terrified, and we had this the last time we ran this, we had a character who became terrified. When you are pushed, you go from stable to nervous to scared to terrified. And when you are terrified, you roll and you have one of 3 responses, one of 3 panic responses: freeze, flee, flip out. And those are exactly what they are. Flip out, by the way, is the least likely of those. You roll a d12, and 1 through 5 is freeze, 6 through 10 is flee, and 11 and 12 is flip out. And what happens, any of those 3 that you roll, only lasts until the beginning of your next turn in the next round. And at that point, you automatically roll. And if you pass, you move back to frightened or scared, rather. So it's like the extreme emotional response, positive or negative, you're only guaranteed to have to deal with it for one revolution of the initiative order. And if you succeed on your next test, you become like you lose that moment. You flee. And that's what happened with this character. She failed that test and she fled. She ran away. And then next round, the first thing she did is she rolled another stability test. She passed, which means she moved one to the right, which brought her just to scared. She's no longer panicked. She no longer loses control of her character effectively for a round. But she gets control of herself. But she's still, shaken up by the whole thing. On the other side of the continuum, if you move out to that hero's response, the far right, same thing. You're guaranteed for one round, and then to stay there, you have to succeed at a stability test. It's like you grab that thing and you just keep going. And when you roll that, when you roll the D12, you can either gain what's called general resistance, which makes every test against you 1 point more difficult. You could gain extra action points. You could gain extra, there are mechanical benefits to being like really out there on that edge. And what I imagined was that great scene, funny scene in Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, when the stormtroopers show up on the Death Star and Han Solo's there and he's yelling and he just chases the whole crowd down the hall. And then he comes around the corner and he's like, whoa, okay, there are too many of them. He turns and he runs back. It's not, think about this. He doesn't get scared at that moment, but that moment of just like overwhelming courage and the power that flows from it, it runs out. Mm-hmm. It lasts for that moment and then it runs out. And then he like, okay, I got to get out of here. He's not scared. He just doesn't have that like overflowing courage and the power that comes with it. And that's what I wanted to capture. And so the GM can spend meta currency to push people more into fear. Like if you want to have that moment when that creepy looking ghost shows up, and narratively it would be like, this would be really cool if one of the characters got really scared. I'm going to spend points. I'm going to give up points. One of the things I've realized with horror is that there has to be a degree of loss of control.
Yeah.
And so the GM has to do that. Like there are times the GM is going to have to do things to push the story, and you can't just say, well, I rolled these points and I win. And it's not horror. Anyway, so stability, 7 points, fluid. There's a visual. You're moving this glass bead or whatever back and forth on your character sheet, and then there are commensurate penalties and bonuses that go with it. And it is possible, actually, if a player rolls like really, really well or really, really poorly, you could move several spaces at once. Like you could go from like focused, which is 1 over from stable, onto the courageous side. You could potentially go from focused to scared, which would be 3 steps to the left if you rolled really poorly and the thing against which you're rolling was like really powerful. Like if that thing just appears out of nowhere and all of a sudden does that very almost trite, like fuzzy, like jerky movement, and all of a sudden is in your face, that could potentially be like an overwhelming fear moment. And that would cause you to move a bunch of spaces at once. Likewise, if you rolled really well and spent a bunch of meta currency, you could potentially go from like really scared to really fired up. And I think narratively, we have lots of examples in the horror genre of that. Like, the dude's girlfriend is like getting attacked by the vampire, and suddenly he finds his courage and fights back. So I'm thus far I've been happy with how it's worked out. So what are your thoughts? What are your questions?
I mean, I really like it. Obviously, the most recent horror thing technically the most recent thing horror thing I've played is D&D, which is incredibly binary because you either pass
Not
a
very
fear check
horrible.
and you're fine, or you fail a fear check and you're frightened, which gives you disadvantage, and that's it. So
Yeah.
forgetting about that. Would be the Alien games where, as much as it's fun and as a GM I really enjoy it,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, you're the always the same thing happened. The players build up their sort of stress or whatever it was called up into a certain point where now they basically max out, and then their characters either freeze and it was always going to happen.
Yeah.
And like you've pointed out, that even when you run it, because I've done it, I've done like the big adventure thing, even when you do it with Marines, those Marines still all like it's going to happen. Doesn't matter how well eventually you are going to fail a roll,
Yep.
and eventually you are going to just fire your gun at the rest of your team, which is going to make them stressed and blah blah blah. And it just so, and there was none of that coming back. Whereas on yours, it sounds like you can. I have two suggestions.
Go for it.
One suggestion is I like um, the idea of like that you've got these three different things that can happen, and it's not like the panic, the freeze panic, or a flee freeze or flip out.
Flip out.
Perfect. They're all F as
And
well.
by the way, if you flip out, you essentially hand your character over to,
Yeah.
and there's a process of negotiation. Like, well, what does my character do?
I like that. What I think would be cool is if each character had a different ratio of those. So some characters might be
Oh,
more likely to flip out and less likely to flee, like the jock, or the
oh,
proper jock, like the proper meathead. He probably is less likely to, so maybe his goes like 4-4-4, whereas like the properly cowardly one, maybe they go like 6-5-1. So
interesting.
maybe like something you build in character creation is like,
Hmm.
right, your minimum is you have to have at least 3 points in flee and 1 point in flip out, and 2 points in freeze. And then you can choose where the other things go so that it adds up to 12. And
Or
then
it
you just
could
have
be
it as a little track.
I would be in. I like that actually. I like that a lot. I would be inclined to say minimum 2 points in each,
Well, you said you wanted flip out to be less likely.
which
That's the
is
only reason I
it
said
is
one for
11 to
that.
12. So it is 2 points right now. It is the
Yeah.
least likely of the of those. But I guess it doesn't matter because
I think it's a good idea to put, actually, it wouldn't matter, to maybe make that one the one that's, or maybe give a maximum. The most you can have in this is
six.
4 or something, but the others can go up to 6 or something. Well,
That's
they can't go both up
interesting.
to 6. I
I
think that, just because that sounds like it'd be very easy to do on a character sheet, because you just
yes,
have next to your fear, your stability track, you then have another thing, or it's a circle or something, it's whatever it is, doesn't
yeah.
matter. And then next to it you have the numbers 1 to 12, and then you've written next to it flee, flee,
Or
flee,
just what I could do
freeze,
is
freeze, freeze.
I have space on the character sheet that I'm building underneath
Or
the
do a clock.
character. Huh?
Do a clock, because the clock goes 1 to 12.
Or I mean, I could just have freeze, flee, flip out, and a line next to each, and you just put
Yes.
the range
Yeah,
because
yeah.
yeah, and
I just
maybe
think
I
that'd be quite cool, because it sounds like that'd be very easy to do without changing anything,
nope.
but it would actually make each character's fear response different, which I
Yes,
think is important.
I
That's
like
one
that.
thing that really bugged me about Alien. It didn't matter whether you were a Marine
Nope.
or just the average Joe, you still had the same. I mean, you had the same chance. You have a better chance of the Marine of not failing. But once you started getting stressed,
Yeah.
it was the same chance of anything
Yeah.
happening. Which, having watched the Alien films, actually, it's quite true to how the Alien films go. But still, I would like the idea that some characters are more likely to freeze, like the Sergeant, and
I
some
like
characters are more
that
likely to flee, like Bill
because
Paxton's character, and some characters are more likely to flip out.
and if you have if you experience one of those three, there's sucky things that happen with all. Like for example, if you freeze, you become a helpless character when it comes to bonus to hit from other characters.
Yeah.
So if you free, yeah, if you flee, you are open to opportunity attacks. You lose you lose points, you lose control of your character because you just take off running.
Well,
Okay.
you split the party and
You
you're away
totally
from your
do.
mates, so yeah, you're
And
screwed.
flip out, obviously, my guess is that flip out actually sounds the most interesting, but flip out is the one that like, players who are trying to win, uh, would choose the least. But then, I mean, if I decided, maybe if I say, look, the most you can put in any one of them is 6, but you have to put points in all of them,
Mm.
then you have, a 50% chance of, and none of those are terrific.
The
Now,
good thing about flip out, and if flip out is handing it over, whether it's to another player or to you, that can be flip out and do something, I'm going to go balls deep into the monster and try and kill him, but
It
you
could
get
be.
wrecked doing it. Or it can be attacking your friends.
Yeah.
Anyway, but that's all right. The other, I was wondering, the range sounds a bit narrow on only having 7 total. And the thing that made me think that is the fact you said if you roll really poorly, it can move 2, and the GM can spend. That means in theory you can go from like
Well,
0 to the
if
worst
you okay,
in
if you
one. So
move, if you
I wondered
move,
about you trying 9, just like a little bit
yeah,
bigger.
I thought about that, and it's tough because you and I have talked about this. The on the one hand, the more granular,
Yeah.
the more nuanced. But the more granular, the more rules, and the more and
Well, I mean, you're thinking you don't necessarily need more rules, just the fact that it's just like that little buffer between you're on that side, but it just, one
right.
really bad roll isn't going to put you
Well,
one
here's
step away from the
so
really bad
so
thing.
if you fail, you move one to the left wherever
Yeah.
you are. So if you don't succeed, you move one to the right now, or left rather. Now, if you get a setback, which is you succeed, but you have roll more ones than successes, you've stayed put. You're just giving potentially that actually does not move. A setback does not move you to the left. It keeps you where you are. Now, you can't spend points to move to the right because you haven't succeeded,
Yeah.
even if there's points in the party pool. If you botch, okay, if you botch, that is, you don't succeed and you roll ones, you're going to move one to the left, and the ones that you roll are going to create meta currency for the GM to spend on you at that point. So it's not like a double double where,
Okay.
oh, I botched and that moved me. If you fail, you move one left. Moving farther left requires the GM to spend the meta currency, and I'm at this point capping the meta currency. The GM has a pool, and the players as a group have a pool, and I'm capping it at 5, which is not that much.
No.
It's 5, and what happens with that is you can spend as many points as you want, and that the pool never bleeds off. It never deflates, but they disappear pretty quickly. So if the GM, let's say the GM has a party of 3 players, and one of them fails, and the GM has, let's say 3 points in their pool. Well, they're only going to be able to move, let's say 2 characters fail and 1 succeeds. So 2 characters automatically move 1 to the left. But to move them farther left, it increases in cost. So an extra move left is 1 point. 2 extra moves is 2 points. So if I wanted to move someone, if someone was stable and I wanted to move them all the way to terrified, like I really wanted to like just stomp on them right then and there, that player would have to fail the roll to move 1 to the left. I would have to spend 1 point and then 2 other points to move them the other 2 all the way to terrified. I've just blown 3 points on one player.
I mean, I wouldn't even
So,
say that you're allowed to as a GM move more than 1, because then it feels like you're the players failed the roll and then you're moving them the rest of the way.
but I'm also
But
but my thought at this point at least is that I'm then burning up a very limited resource. Now, if the player botches, those ones, any ones that you roll when you botch, you failed, but those ones give me extra dice. So that's where, like, if you really screw up, all right, like if you really screw up your roll, then that's going to be one of those rare moments. You have rolled no successes and you've rolled ones. Rolling no successes and multiple ones is not likely. Like you're probably, I mean, yes, it can happen, but if you're rolling 5 dice and you roll no successes, the chances of you rolling 2 or 3 ones is pretty low. It's very low, actually. So it will be only in those extreme situations where the GM has enough extra dice to push more than one character a few steps at once. Like you're not going to blow up the whole party unless everybody screws up royally, and then that could make for an interesting, oh
yeah.
crap moment. But I've
I
got
say
to the
while you're playtesting, I would try sticking an extra thing in there. I'd also remove your cap off your bad guy meta currency for the reason that we have repeatedly said in 2D20, which is when you've got, as the adventure goes on and you don't actually spend it and you let it build it,
Mm,
it's literally like it's a physical
that's a
representation
good
of the
point.
bad stuff that's going to happen. Whereas if you keep spending it down because you have to, like the bad stuff's happening all the way through. So we've
Yeah, that's
always
a
said
good
that one
point.
good thing in 2D20 is that, because you've always said you put it out in front of the players so they can
Yeah,
see it. They can see the dread building. Um, so
yeah,
yeah, I
that's a
wouldn't
good point.
necessarily cap it. And that's something you've said. So
Okay, well then if I
I can see
said
why
it,
you would want to cap it because it is, but you're capping it from sort of like a gamer's point of view, but actually from a horror thing point of view, I don't think you want to.
okay, that's a good point. So
What you do
okay,
instead is
so
you cap your spends. You don't do certain things. So you can save it all till the end, but then you can't just blow it all in like completely screwing the players.
yeah,
But yeah, I think it's a good idea to be able to have because it's an option. You could spend it early and confuse the players if you
yeah.
want to.
The other thing that's hard about it too is that you have no guarantee that you're going to, like, you could just roll poorly, or your players throughout a session you could potentially not generate that many.
Yeah.
You just don't roll, so you're kind of stuck, and then you're yeah, okay. So if I remove the cap for the GM's metacurrency pool, I leave it on the players because obviously the more players, the
Oh
more
yeah,
it's gonna.
definitely leave
And
it on the
I
players.
would rather it. I would rather the players be using it. Um, but I'm going to do that with the stability. I'm going to go ahead for the panic response and for the hero's response. I'm going to let the players adjust so that when they roll, there still will be a random element in there, but they can choose where their character is more likely, how their character is more likely to respond. I like that because then it differentiates them, and it's a minor thing. It doesn't require me to create or do it, and it's something you decide on your character. There it is
Yeah.
on my
Yeah.
character sheet. I just
Yeah.
roll. I like that. I like that.
But yeah, that's sounding really good. And actually, there's a massive gap in the market because the only horror game that anyone ever talks about is Call of Cthulhu, and Call of Cthulhu is a very specific,
Very.
it's the mythos, but there isn't something for sort of classic or modern or other. Although there's various zombie games, but there really isn't other horror. I mean, there are. You talk about chill, but ones that are out there and people know about.
Right. And like there's Monster of the Week, which is like a powered by the apocalypse oid
It's,
sort
it's
of
you know
thing.
it's Buffy, isn't it? I mean, that's what it is, or Supernatural. It's
Well, I mean, that's what, remember that my goal is essentially that or a movie. Like if you wanted to play Nightmare on Elm Street, one of the movies, that's what this would be for.
I think
I'm
that is
not,
one thing that you need to consider that if that just like they did in Alien, that you do need to potentially tweak the rules between if it's a one shot and if it is a campaign.
well, here's what I'm
Because
building it to do. I'm building it for what I'm calling single story runs,
yeah,
which could take you one session or maybe two or three sessions,
yeah,
but a single episode, single movie. And I will develop after that's done, I am going to write some optional rules for if you wanted to run this episodically or run something campaign-esque, how do you handle things like, are there ongoing, like, emotional scars or something like that? Is there an experience system? See, that's a lovely thing I don't have to put up with.
yeah. I mean
I
that's where you may want to then increase your stability track and you just go, right, I'm gonna have three things in the middle to make it that little when you're playing on an episode, I think to make it because it's way less likely that the characters get terrified. So you just stick in an extra step there, right?
Yeah,
There's an extra blank step or there's an extra, you stick a second
yeah,
nervous in. There's a second nervous in, just something really easy like that. So then there's no extra rules. It's purely just changing the track when you're playing in the, and all it needs then is one extra line of rules to say that, and then you have a second character sheet for campaign play
yeah.
to make
That's a
it
good point.
less likely you're going to end up and terrified.
Yeah.
So that's a nice, easy fix.
One of the things I
Um,
was also thinking about with campaign play as an optional rule is that characters that had been exposed to nasty things when it came to stability, I've got to figure out, like, to what extent would that serve as a protection, and also potentially how might that serve as like a trigger to them like losing. So I was thinking about how I would factor that in, but I have been disciplined about pushing aside optional rule creation until I've
I
got the
think,
thing
yeah,
nailed
I think
down.
that's the kind of thing. Right, I'm going to use that for campaign play. I'm going to have a list of like bad guys that I overcame. And so if I see them, I get a bonus dice and kind of
Yeah,
monster types that I'm now really scared of. So I actually have a penalty when I'm doing them. That could you literally just be a list,
yeah,
literally just a list of like things I'm not scared of now and things I'm really scared of now. And you just write them in the list. And if one of those comes up again, you either get a bonus or it's an extra difficulty or it's a harder difficulty. You know what I mean?
yeah. That
That'd
makes
be very
sense.
straightforward to do. And again, so I'm back to the idea of campaigns would have a different character sheet, which you don't have to worry about for now because it's an optional rule. But it's something to think about. But yeah, I think that's the easy way to fix
Yeah.
that. Just different character sheet.
Okay. All right. Cool. Well, we're going to test it this weekend. We're going to do a one shot this weekend. That's going to be a little more on the campy side. That is, the characters are going to be teenagers who go to a party at the abandoned amusement park deep in the woods outside of town. What could go wrong? There's that. And then next week, that's this weekend. And then next weekend, I'm going to do a one where they are another one shot where they are part of a secret society during the American Revolution, and they have to stop the British from using nasty occult things against the Patriots, which is actually an adventure that I ran years ago using Cortex, as a matter of fact, using the supernatural rules, and it was cool. It worked out. It worked out. The
I was about to say, can you send me or share me the stuff if you've been using Google? But yeah, I wouldn't be running that one.
Actually, it was really cool. I printed this huge map of 1775 Boston that was drawn by a British engineering officer that showed the whole peninsula and everything. It was really cool, and it was right before the Battle of Bunker Hill, Breed's Hill, and yeah, they were the I'm not going to tip my hand because if it
Um,
works out again, this will be one of the adventures that I will write that'll go in the book. Because what I want
yeah,
I want people to be able to play it as one shots where the characters are in the know, so they can
yeah,
operate from a standpoint of knowledge. One shots where people are
yeah, that's
not,
cool.
and they have to confront it and deal with it.
Yeah, if you can share me the stuff, because Mika said the other day that she wants to do some role playing games, and actually I can test the horror thing out with her and
Oh yeah,
Annie perfectly fine.
you know what I'll do? I'll export the PDF of the design file, the publisher file that I'm working on, and you can just use that.
You're doing your basic rough version in Publisher.
No, I'm doing it in I'm writing it and then I'm formatting it in
Jesus,
Affinity Publisher so
so
that it
far
looks
ahead.
right. So I figure I might
But
as
yeah,
well.
if you could send me that and any adventure stuff you've written or anything, yeah, that'd be good.
Cool. All right, I'll do that. So, all right, thank you for the feedback and thank you for the ideas. Those are terrific. I will I'll put those to use and I'll let you know how they go.
Cool. Yeah, it sounds good.
All right, cool. That brings us to the end.
So, as usual, don't forget to like, subscribe, tick bells, join the
Right,
Discord,
right. Ring the bell.
tell
School's
your
in.
podcast provider that we're the best podcast.
That's right. That's right.
Tell your
Tell your neighbors.
friends
Tell your
that, yeah,
friends.
that we
Listen
do
always through
we're
to
not
the
just
end. That kind of.
2D20.
That's right. All right, cool. Thank you, as always, for listening to Fluff and Crunch. You can join our Discord, you can subscribe to the podcast, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, all through the links in the show notes. Thanks again. Have a great day. We look forward to talking with you.